So welcome everybody. I see Velina there. Hello, darling. And hello, everybody that is still joining in. Good day to all. And welcome to the panel discussion on sustainability through knowledge-based planning to mitigate climate change challenges. Among the many aspects that can be considered in this topic, we will cover 3 studies, one on housing, one on corporate sustainability standards, and one on urban planning. Let's begin with Jay Mohorčich, and his work focuses on human survival, and he teaches courses at Lehman College in American politics, political philosophy, and science policy. And let's hear what Jay has to share on his findings, whether housing accelerates or not climate change.
Thank you very much. So the presentation is called, Is New Housing Good for People and the Planet? I think I have a couple different titles, but they're all rewordings of this basic idea, which is that it's quite controversial whether adding new housing construction, especially market rate construction, is good for the planet, broadly construed, for slowing climate change and the people on it, or whether it tends to accelerate climate change. Okay. It's common to see those of us on the left or environmentalists sometimes oppose new housing. So you can often see this probably in your own city or your neighborhood. A new apartment complex is going up where you live. And so people organize against that. And they say, don't build this housing, it will push people out, or it will worsen environmental problems, or it'll cause more congestion, and so on and so forth. And the question of this presentation is simple, is it a good idea? Is it a good and just left-wing and environmentalist cause to oppose new housing construction in your neighborhood, in your city? The arguments against housing, the arguments in favor of stopping new housing construction, especially market rate housing, is that stopping and opposing these apartment projects can improve the lives of people who live near them, and it can improve the capacities for self-determination of the people who live near them. That is, people have more control over what their neighborhoods look like, and their lives will be better if you can stop new apartment construction near you. Another claim is that stopping new apartments advances egalitarian and environmental causes. That is to say, it makes neighborhoods more fair, and it's better for the environment. But I argue that those claims are probably not right. I think that the evidence indicates that building new housing of all types, that includes market rate housing and fancy housing, adding new apartment buildings generally improves the people's lives and capacities for self-determination. And we'll get into a bit of why that works. And it tends to advance egalitarian and environmental causes in general, rather than make them worse. The central reason for why adding new dense housing in existing neighborhoods, existing cities, is that people living densely together live more lightly on the planet. That is, they have less environmental impacts per capita, and this includes especially greenhouse gas emissions per capita. There's a wonderful map, which I didn't have time to put in the PowerPoint, but it's a shot of the New York City metro area, and it's just every district is color-coded by the amount of greenhouse gas emissions that each person who lives there emits on average. And in the absolute core of the city, in places like Manhattan and downtown Brooklyn, the numbers are extremely low. The average person there lives in an apartment building that shares walls with other people, and they don't drive to work. And then as you get into the suburbs, the numbers get redder and redder and redder and redder, as the average greenhouse gas emissions rise and rise and rise as you get further from a city center. There's additional land use considerations, which is that if you can fit 1 million people into 10 square kilometers, that leaves a lot of space open. Whereas if you are trying to fit 1 million people in, say, suburban style or rural style housing, it could easily take up hundreds to thousands of kilometers. And so the land use is much better. The greenhouse gas emissions are much better when people live densely in cities. And this is well established in the literature on urbanism in cities. So I think that a better way, instead of opposing new housing construction, new apartment construction, in your neighborhood would be to advocate for adding a lot of new housing, actually as much dense housing as your area can reasonably support, especially in wealthy neighborhoods. Why in rich neighborhoods? Well, there's a couple reasons. One is that rich neighborhoods tend to have the best existing amenities, so things like schools and transit and jobs, and then opening up those amenities to allowing other people to live in those neighborhoods has strong social justice benefits and economic justice benefits. It allows people access to jobs they would not normally have access to. It allows people to send their kids to better schools than they ordinarily would. And it tends to intensify the environmental and greenhouse gas benefits for the simple reason that rich neighborhoods in the centers of cities are often the densest areas around. And so allowing more people to live in those rich neighborhoods shortens their commutes and allows people to live more densely and more lightly on the planet in aggregate. Two classic objections to the position that I'm arguing for are that one, cities are environmentally harmful, and two, that this way of thinking, that advocating for building a bunch of new housing, in some way furthers a neoliberal way of thinking or a market-oriented way of thinking. I think those are both extremely important objections, and so I want to talk about each one. So objection one, cities are environmentally harmful, is something that I think we're all familiar with. The cities certainly seem to be visually environmentally harmful because they involve a lot of concrete, things get paved over, cities have a lot of pollution and cars, and they're physically smelly. They don't smell as good as the woods do or as nature does. And then the market and neoliberalism objection is that if you argue for building new types of housing from all sources, including public housing, but also private development, that in some way furthers the logic of the market or a neoliberal logic for solving problems, and that can have negative effects. And indeed has been shown in the history of market-based interventions, Thatcher's UK, Reagan's United States, to have negative effects. The way that I would think about each of these objections is that, as we've just talked about, people living densely harm the planet less. So cities may look bad because they have a lot of concrete, they have a lot of buildings and cars and roads, but as a matter of fact, it's much better to have, again, 1 million people living in 10 square kilometers than 1 million people living across 500 square kilometers. That harms the planet less. There's a lot fewer GHG emissions associated with each individual person, and you can get people to move into cities. And then for the market's neoliberalism objection, my claim is simply that what actually materially happens to people is what matters. So what matters is what happens. That is, that the actual material outcomes and whether people's lives are made better or worse, whether GHG emissions go up or down, is actually the relevant criterion. And that certain slightly abstracted academic considerations about the logic that's supposed to operate in one area or another are not, they can matter, but on net, we should actually really try to be focused and extremely rigorous about what is actually happening in material people's lives in real concrete ways. And we should really focus on that as our criterion of action. This is a recap of the things that new housing, especially in wealthy, centrally located, dense neighborhoods, actually does. It increases economic justice, as I've said, increases access to jobs and amenities that you otherwise would not have access to. It shifts the balance of power from those who have to rent a place to live, or to those who have to rent a place to live, from those who tend to own property and land. Why does it do this? As you add new housing, you tend to stabilize or reduce rents. And as you prevent new housing from being built, you tend to increase rents. You can see this in places where new housing is banned or very difficult to construct, like San Francisco. Rents are extremely high. In places that allow new housing to be built, Tokyo is a good example. Tokyo is very populous, very dense, very wealthy. It should have sky-high rents. It should have New York or San Francisco or London style rents. It doesn't, because housing in Tokyo is built very rapidly and very abundantly. As a result, Tokyo has some of the lowest greenhouse gas emissions per capita. If you took the 20 or so million people that live in Tokyo and you spread them out across the countryside, the results would be a complete economic disaster. It'd be really bad for the planet. the lower that market rate rents are in a given city, a given neighborhood, the better off renters are, and the worse off landlords and people who own apartments and homes are. So building new housing shifts the balance of power to people who rent away from people who own apartments. And then finally, as we talked about, it helps the planet by leaving it alone. You pack more people into an area, it's better for land use, it's better for greenhouse gas emissions. So that's the basic outline. Currently, a lot of environmentalists, including people that I have been in the past and am allied with, tend to oppose new housing when it's proposed to be added in their neighborhoods. But I think this is probably not empirically tenable, actually, and adding new housing, yes, even in your neighborhood, is generally a good climate solution. And I think that environmentalists should avoid opposing it wherever they can. Thank you very much for listening. That's the presentation. Very excited about the discussion.
Thank you, Jay.
Of course.
That's really amazing to see how these differences can be made, especially in populated cities, and that you see this come and go of people that work in very busy areas, but that could be a lot denser. But we'll exchange and talk more in the end. I would like to jump to our next panelist. Corporate performance on sustainable management is another key factor in supporting SDGs, for instance. And Hannes Matt is our speaker that will, he is a researcher focusing on the inadequacies of current methodological standards for sustainability management. And at the United Sustainability Group, he researches natural capital accounting and corporate valuation. So let's hear what Hannes has to say.
Thank you. Thanks for the introduction. So I will begin by trying to share my screen. Hopefully it works.
Mm-hmm.
That's perfect.
Yeah, it looks normal.
Okay, perfect. So yeah, thanks again for having me. It's a pleasure to present my research here on the conference. And as you already said, it is on the methodological conflicts in the field of corporate sustainability reporting. And I'm looking at current developments and the way we can move forward. So the slide switched, right? Yeah. So the purpose of the paper is to identify current methodological conflicts in the field of sustainability reporting, and to apply those conflicts to the currently most relevant standards and standard setters in the field of corporate sustainability reporting. So you could say that the purpose is to answer the questions, what are the current methodological conflicts? What are the currently most relevant standards and standard setters? And to what extent are the conflicts that we will discuss a part of those relevant standards that will shape the future of sustainability reporting? The method I used is literature analysis. So in the first place, I looked at the relevant research on the topic, but I also looked a lot at the papers of public policy administrations and also on the publicly available documents of the standard setters themselves and analyzed them. And what's special about the research compared to other research in the field is that it tries to combine the critical and the managerial path. That those are terms coined by Burritt and Schaltegger, which is basically that the critical theorists always argued that corporate sustainability reporting and accounting is basically the cause and the source of corporate sustainability problems, because conventions are not fit for the purpose of recording and disclosing information about corporate social and environmental impacts. And a very opposite view is from the management-oriented path that would see sustainability reporting as a means to inform management. So the critics would say it's a mean to get to a more sustainable world. And management is not interesting, like the information needs of management is not so interesting in that regard. And the totally different view is the management-oriented approach to it. And I'm combining arguments from both sides, which are often very different. So I will go a little bit quicker to the theoretical background. Basically, from the managerial path, you would say that the question of how useful sustainability reporting is regarding how good the information is that it provides for management, for investors, like how worthy and useful is it for management decisions, and behind that, the overall question of how strong is reporting on sustainability issues correlated with corporate performance. The idea here would be that companies minimize their corporate risk by taking on social and ecological responsibility, and subsequently this would lead to a higher corporate performance. That's the basic idea. So when we look at that, there is overall very, very low evidence that this is actually true. There was a big meta research on how strongly corporate performance and sustainability reporting are linked, and there is only very low evidence. And overall, maybe some of you know the problem that investors are highly discontent with ESG information. Like there is the term coined by Berg and his team, aggregate confusion. From the critical path, the background is that sustainability reporting doesn't measure strong sustainability. So the standards don't have the means of quantifying how much corporate activity leads to the build-up of ecology and of natural capital. And this poses a lot of conflicts in the current field. For example, that corporate sustainability has become more a marketing tool for companies to present themselves, and it even became a mean for greenwashing, so that companies are cloaking their true impacts more with sustainability reporting than actually reporting on what their true impacts are. Just to name a few of the arguments from the critical path. So, and talking about my findings, I would start with the second research questions. What are the currently most relevant standards for sustainability reporting? So on this slide, don't focus on all the acronyms. The important thing is that under the ISSB that you can see in the blue shape, which is the International Sustainability Standards Board, recently in the last 2 or 3 years, a lot of the most important standards in the world consolidated. And the ISSB is under the roof of the International Financial Reporting Standards Board, the IFRS, which has a very, very high political weight because they are designing the standards for the financial reporting world. And therefore, if they get in the game of sustainability reporting, they have a very, very high international political weight. So the standards that the ISSB is currently developing, that the drafts were launched just in 2022, are of high importance. The second standard is the European Sustainability Reporting Standard. The background here is that the European Union just adopted, just 6 days ago, the new CSR directive. And this will actually be the first time that by law, there is a reporting standard that is mandatory. Before that, we already had it, that companies had to report, but they could pretty much choose which standard they use for that. And now this European Sustainability Reporting Standard is mandatory, which makes basically within the EU, over the course of the next few years, every other standard more or less obsolete. The draft of that standard, which was developed by an advisory group to the European Union, were also just published in spring this year. And the third reporting standard that is on high importance is the GRI. This is mainly because it's the most widely used sustainability reporting standard. It's basically the norm and has a very high guidance and orientation function in the field and always had. And both standard setters that we talked about, the European reporting standard by the EFRAG and the ISSB standards are in cooperation with the Global Reporting Initiative and very much aligned with it. So those are the big three players that are currently shaping this field and will shape the future field of sustainability reporting. And by analyzing them and looking at the current developments, we will have the best means of answering questions of how good is corporate sustainability reporting actually fit to support sustainable development. And this is a very important question when we look at the global goals of social development and also on planning in cities, because they will, we will depend on those standards to show what the impacts of corporate actions actually are. And if we don't, as we know, what's not measured can't be managed, we will highly depend on the insights that they can provide us. So findings, the other points, like what are the actual current methodological conflicts in these standards? And I identified basically 4 overarching conflicts. And I will stick now a little bit longer to this slide and maybe rush a little bit through the details then. The first one is the underlying data. Sustainability reporting basically never had a common databases. I will elaborate on that. The second one is stakeholder inclusiveness, like stakeholder theory saying that we should include all stakeholders to determine the content of sustainability reports, and therefore shedding light of the sustainability problems that those stakeholders are affected by is still in its infancy. And stakeholder theory is mainly happening on a normative level and not having any relevance in corporate practice. The third one is that there is an unsolved debate on materiality. I'll come back on that as well. And the fourth is that currently most standards are not rooted in a sustainability context. I will elaborate on that as well. What do I mean by the underlying data problem? The quote here says basically that in financial reporting, companies have to follow the rules of accounting. Like you have laws that say you have to account, there are laws that say how you have to account, and what you report on follows one-to-one from the accounting. And in sustainability reporting, we never had anything like that. There was never anything like a standardized sustainability accounting. And so what to report on was and still often is very random. The consolidation of the field to basically 3 big players made a huge progress in terms of data consolidation, but there still remains the question of what actually to report on. Like, it got way more easy because the field from almost 100 standards got consolidated to a few 3. So, which makes it way easier to solve this problem, but there is still discussion on what and how to actually report on it. The issue of stakeholder inclusiveness says basically that it roots in stakeholder theory, which says that the business of business is basically not only business anymore, but maximizing the value for not only shareholders, corporate shareholders, but all stakeholders is the goal. And that by including stakeholders who are impacted by corporate action into sustainability reporting, this would lead to the betterment of those impacts. And until today, this has largely failed. Like the Global Reporting Initiative started with that goal of including all stakeholders, but until today, quote, the low use of GRI reports by civil society organizations, by other NGOs, by consumer organizations, by organized labor, and by the media, the low use, has always been a long-standing concern to GRI secretary. So they did not really had success with this goal. And this leads to the reality today, basically, that even though we have that normative stakeholder theory, we cannot fight the fact that most companies only recognize those stakeholders in their reports that are of strategic and financial interest to them. Yeah. So what do I mean by the term materiality debate? Basically, materiality means what information to include in a report. What is important to include? You can't report on everything, so you have to focus on some aspects that are important, that are material. And one approach would be financial materiality, which asks the question, what sustainability impacts might affect the financial performance of my company? And then you can turn this around and say, on the other hand, environmental and social materiality, how do the impacts of a company harm the climate and ecology? So different approaches. And then there is the term double materiality, which basically considers both, and the term dynamic materiality, which says that even things who are not financially material in the first place can become financially material over time. So the European sustainability reporting standards that will become mandatory in the European Union took as one of the first standards a very big approach regarding environmental and social materiality, because they are saying, quote, the undertaking shall disclose its plans to ensure that its business model and strategy are compatible with the transition to achieve no net loss by 2030, net gain from 2030, and full recovery by 2050. So it really puts the means of what does nature need and not what is material to the company to the center stage, which has not happened before with that. And the difference becomes clear when we look at the International Sustainability Standards Board that chooses a whole financially material approach, because, as I said, the ISSB, under the roof of the IFRS Foundation, sets the global standards for financial reporting. So their key stakeholders are investors, institutional investors, and therefore focusing on financial materiality serves the need of their central stakeholders, namely investors. But they are, from both sides, the critical path and the managerial path, being highly criticized for that. From the critical path, it's obvious, if you only measure what's financially material, you will only capture a fraction of all corporate sustainability impacts. Of course, that's a problem. But also from the managerial path, that might say, oh yeah, we are only interested in the financially material information. This approach leaves it basically to the corporates themselves to decide what is material. So it leaves the materiality assessment to the companies. And if an investor, for example, has a different approach of what is material to them, they don't have the information, because the corporation before decided that question already. And double materiality, so considering both financial and social and environmental materiality, would be the only way to resolve both critics. So the last point that I identified is the point of sustainability context, which basically asks the question, do reports refer to ecological parameters like impact limits, ecological thresholds, and planetary boundaries? The picture is a graphic of the planetary boundaries, which measures like how good we are in staying in our safe operating space, impacting the planet. And you would then pose the question, like, do reports actually address this ecological reality and address the question of how much corporates stay within the safe operating space. And if you just look here to the bottom of the slide, I quoted a research that found out that only 1 in almost 300 sustainability reports even addressed environmental boundaries in their reports, which is in that context a very big conflict. And then, so this is the last slide before my conclusion. I know that I'm a little bit over the time, but that's the same quote that we looked before from the European Sustainability Reporting Standard. And by saying that corporates need to show how their strategy is aligned with no net loss of ecology and of nature, they are directly referring to ecological boundaries. The goals that they are quoting here are actually the same goals as the Convention on Biological Diversity is addressing in the new post-2020 biodiversity framework. So by aligning to, by forcing companies to show how they are aligned to these goals, they need to address the context, because how would you measure if you add to net loss or net gain of ecology when not referring to the boundaries of those of these ecological spheres? So, and then just to conclude, overall, from the perspective of both the critical and the managerial path, there are fundamental conflicts and shortcomings, even in the consolidated field of the 3 standards today. The European sustainability reporting standards will mandate companies to address ecological boundaries. That's a big progress, but the important question now will be how to actually do that. There are no standardized methods on how to actually report in the context of ecology. The ISSB seems like a big step backwards, because it narrows sustainability reporting down to financial materiality, and that is highly criticized by both critics and managers. And I really doubt that the ISSB will play a big role in the future, even though it has that big political weight. And last but not least, the GRI will, its future role will highly depend on whether it can solve its problem with stakeholder inclusiveness, where it really built their legitimacy on. Yeah, thank you very much.
Thank you, Hannes. That's wonderful again. Great research and great findings, and especially when designing cities and urban planning, too, when including the private sector and what they actually do in order to be there for climate change. But let's do this discussion afterwards. And I would like now to introduce you to Rafael de Lucena Perini. He's a professor in administration, PhD researcher at the University of Caxias do Sul, and a researcher also at the cityliving.lab.com. And do you find the how to share your presentation, Rafael?
My presentation is about an ongoing job that I'm doing, an ongoing research about my thesis, my PhD thesis. And let me just open my camera here, this camera. Okay. Yeah. It's about the city of Detroit. I've been there in 2020 studying and doing my PhD there.
Excuse me, Rafael, both cameras are working. So if you want, you can turn off the other one. This one actually looks better. There.
Okay. Which one is better?
The other one. Shut down that one. There.
Okay. So this is an ongoing research that I'm working on. about the city of Detroit, and listening to your presentations, it's good to see that my job, I can talk about the two things that you are dealing. The housing, that's a problem, a huge problem in Detroit, and also the corporate sustainability. That is, the three big companies are also thinking about what to do in Detroit. So I have I start with a story about Detroit that is colonized by the French in 71 and 1760. And then the city grew a little, but in the 90s it was an explosion of growth in the city of Detroit. Since the invention of Henry Ford with the assembly line in motion in 1915, this growth accelerated due to the association of government production with the fortune.
Of 240 square miles, we're going to.
Sorry. Okay. So these big three companies that was Ford, Chrysler, and General Motors was the big companies about Detroit. That the population of Detroit, this growth was constant until 1950s, when the phenomenon of globalization and the search of lower production costs led large companies to seek to less costly place to install their production plants, which eventually lead to an exodus of business. So the city was with kind of almost 2 million people in 1950, and then 2010 it was less than 700,000 people. So it was a huge problem. The city also is marked by public security crisis arising from social problems, mainly related to racial issues, culminating in a great revolution that occurred in 1967. This event that influenced the whole country with respect to human rights. It was a huge riot in Detroit that they had a problem. In the last 50 years, the city has been losing residents and consequently revenue, which led to financial collapse. In this period, Detroit has been associated with ruin, abandonment, economic collapse, racial divisions, bankruptcy, and violence, as well as a failure of the neoliberal economy. And then the Michigan State court ruled that the municipality was bankrupted due to the insolvency of his accounts, despite being considered the 18th city in the country. In addition, the city continued to have high unemployment rates of approximately 14.5%, making it difficult to collect personal taxes as well. In part, Detroit's difficulties in the period of his bankruptcy stemmed from a crisis of confidence in the city as this place to live, work, and invest. And racial tensions has left an indelible mark on the city and region of which it is. Well, this research, the objective of this research is to propose a data analysis model for knowledge-based planning in changing industrial cities, and also to describe the process of transformation of the city study and the project that make up this transformation. Analyze indicators of the city that evidence this development, and identify factors in the city development and planning process that define Detroit as an emerging knowledge city. Well, unfortunately, I could not show you my presentation because I have all the methodology presented, and I'm working with 476 indicators to make a correlation between data after 2012. My study is focused on the process after 2012, so what's happening with the city after they declared bankruptcy. And I made a correlation with these all these 467 indicators, and I could identify 128 indicators that had a huge difference between 2012 and then 2020. And also I took these 128 indicators and I distributed them in the capital system process of Professor Javier Carrillo. And now I'm working with analyzing these all these 128 indicators in a quantitative analysis that could say, give me some impressions what happened, which are the best evolution of the city through the indicators. Now I have all the data here, but the tables I cannot show you, unfortunately, but okay. And then I have also a qualitative research that I'm doing, that I'm working with 98 data sources that are the studies from Wayne State University about the evolution of the city after 2012. And I'm also working with Twitter analysis with NVivo software used to analyze the 27 organizations in Detroit that works with the development of Detroit. I'm working also with the state of the city, Detroit, since 2012. So all the state of the city, what mayor has been doing. And also they have the Detroit Policy Conference, that is a huge conference that they have with the Chamber of Commerce of Detroit that I'm working with 34 conferences and interviews with the professors and of the university. A huge document that they have, that is the Detroit Future City, and it was a document produced in 2012. And I'm also using the capital system to work with this qualitative analysis. And now I'm just coding this all this qualitative data to cross with the quantitative data to find what happened with Detroit, what they are doing to get better since 2012. Well, some findings that I have about the research that Detroit, even with the pandemic now, they are really a resilient city. And also maybe the 50s was an exception of the evolution of the city. It's not the regular system of the city, and the city is growing again. Problems that they have. Housing is a huge problem in Detroit because they have empty houses and empty spaces around the city. That's very is a huge problem. The land use also is a huge problem in Detroit because of this, because people just left the city. And also another problem is the auto industry that is trying to stay there with electric cars and some another ways of produce related with sustainability. And the positive effects that I could find in Detroit was in this data that I could analyze, that education is a good thing that they are working with. They have good universities and a huge amount of people getting graduated. Good jobs that are trying to attract again good jobs to Detroit. Arts and cultures, they have these good places and they have a good opportunity there. Technology, one of the images that I have is the Michigan Central Station that they have in Detroit that are trying to transform in a huge place, innovation center in Detroit related with cars and auto. The electric cars and AI. Also, positive effects that I could find is about the social issues that they are working on. The race issue is still a problem, but they are dealing very well with this. And also tourism is another issue that they are bringing back to Detroit. So, unfortunately, I couldn't show you. I had some data, some graphs, some pictures. I don't know what happened here. Yesterday, it was working. Okay, well, that's it, Tatiana. Thank you, and sorry about I couldn't share my presentation here.
That's okay. Thank you, Rafael. It was still very great to hear your findings. And you were a visiting researcher in Detroit, right?
Yeah.
So you had like a very good opportunity as well to get it on site to find out about it. That's really great. And also to bring Professor Javier's capital system into light, because this has everything to do with this panel in the sense of knowledge-based data and development in urban planning. Right. So we've got our sort of 20 minutes discussion here, and despite having one question in the chat that Jay already answered, maybe I will go with each of you with the question I was sort of thinking. Jay, I had also thinking about when you were talking about the housing, also the context of the housing. I was wondering about the infrastructure, especially for when densing housing, especially like in countries that infrastructure is not well developed, let's say, but still, I mean, the cities are big, you know, and sort of chaotic. I mean, how does this aspect of having deficient infrastructure, because then, yes, it does go along with a wealthy and better dense housing in wealth neighborhoods and regions, and how do you see, or how do you include that lack of infrastructure in your research in poor and developing countries?
Mm-hmm. Thank you. That's a great question, Tatiana. I would say that it's true that if you're going to add more people to an area, you have to build more infrastructure. That's actually one of the core challenges. Ideally, letting more people move into, especially a wealthy, denser area, generates far more tax revenue. And so then you can take the dividends of that tax revenue and indeed the savings on public services from having people live close together, and you can spend it on transit lines and improved sewer facilities and improved water delivery facilities. And the other point to make is that it's not as though the alternatives to letting people, say, like live in a city that might be infrastructure constrained are not themselves not infrastructure constrained. So the alternatives is often that those people would otherwise go and live in the suburbs, or they live in a slum, or they live in a rural area. And none of those are famous for having excellent infrastructure services. In fact, they're known for having quite poor infrastructure services. So the infrastructure problem doesn't go away if you were to, say, prevent the building of a new apartment building in a dense area. It just gets moved somewhere else, often to somewhere where it's even harder to provide proper infrastructure, proper water for people to live. Thank you.
Yeah, that's great. Thank you. Hannes, I was thinking also, given your critical analysis on corporate sustainability management limitations, how would it be possible to tackle them? I mean, how would you start? I mean, like on a more concrete action, say. I mean, who would you engage, and how do you bring this about and make this like a evidence? I mean, the evidence is there, but like to give the importance and light to, and how does that go into public policy? Also, I mean, this is something that, Jay, I would like also you to think about it afterwards, because this the densing dense housing is something that has been studying, and still I don't see public policy looking in a broader sense and like, well, you know, just let's go with it and let's do it. And but let's hear Hannes first about how do you think it's possible to tackle it?
Yeah. Two things. Maybe I'll start with the optimistic one. This new European sustainability standard that was made mandatory, or that became a law 6 days ago, and it will be mandatory for more and more companies in the next years. It's a big step forward because it has this quantitative goal in it that forces company to actually report on, like, how are you supporting the UN goals of building up ecosystem, of stopping land degradation, and all these quantitative things. And it says not only report on how you get more energy efficient or how you produce how you use less resource and all that, but it says we have that goal of not having any net loss after 2030 of natural resources and natural capital, and you need to show how you add to that. So the idea would be if every company does that, we can solve the sustainability issue, because then they would have to align to that goal of not adding to any more degradation, and we could quantify what their sustainability impacts are. The problem here is that we do not have any methods yet to do that. So, like, if you would ask a company today, what natural capital do you use and how do you impact natural capital, especially in your supply chains, they would have a lot of the data would lack on that. They would not know how to use that, and we do not until today have standardized methods for actually doing that. There is no common sense on how sustainability accounting should be done and how companies can measure their net impact on nature. But it's a big step forward that at least it's written there. The problem, it will just become a very big problem of how is it actually done in practice. So that's the positive side. The negative side, I think, is that overall the approach of sustainability reporting and of the political regulation, namely regulating what companies need to report on and how to publish these reports and how to provide the information for investors and all that. That whole regulatory approach failed, in my opinion. We had the idea like 20, 30 years ago, especially after the World Summit in Rio, that when companies would disclose more and more information on their sustainability impacts, this would lead over the time to a dynamic where companies with a lot of bad impacts would get punished by the public, by consumers, by investors, and being sustainable would lead to a market advantage and overall to a more sustainable world. And until today, that approach has largely failed. The reporting standards were used for greenwashing, so you could report this and that, but it would not show a clear picture. You could focus on aspects that are in which you perform well, but don't report on other aspects. And an overall confusion emerged because a lot of players were saying, hey, this is a very profitable new field. We can develop standards. We can consult companies on how to apply to those standards. And it got so much self-referential and lost the goal of actually reporting on how sustainable a company is totally out of sight. But we need to imagine that the whole regulation of the last, let's say, 25 years built on that idea. So, and we all know how complex regulation, especially in the European Union, is. And that's what I said before in the discussion before the panel was starting, that we cannot make a blank slate. We have the regulation and these ideas that we had of how we can make the private sector more sustainable are deeply inscribed in the regulations today, and there is no really going back. And I'm deeply doubting that the whole reporting approach that companies would report and then sustainable companies get positively rewarded, and that leads to more sustainability. I don't see many signs that this is actually working. Yeah.
Right. Thank you. Yeah, it's sounds like we are writing the next history chapter in this sense, I think. I mean, like another round of remaking, reshaping, and assessing that this is not actually working, right?
Yeah, what we needed most is a standard for accounting. You need to account which natural capitals you affect. How does the actions of your company affect natural capital, and in all regards, on land use, on water use? The focus on CO2 that we have at the moment is a big other problem, that because we all know CO2 and climate change is not the biggest issue. So yeah, a big step forward would be a standard for natural capital accounting that is mandatory for companies.
Yeah. Let me just see what Nashali wants to talk. Nash.
Hi. My question is for Rafael Perini. From your discussion of your findings and the data that you found on Detroit, you were discussing how if time and compared it to the pandemic was also a good time for Detroit. How so? Were they comparable?
So I had some. I didn't understand.
Nash, can you repeat?
Yeah.
Because your audio was breaking up a bit.
Oh, sorry. Well, maybe my connection's really bad. Maybe we just move on.
No, come on. Let's try one more time.
See. I'll write it in the chat.
Okay, then. All right. Rafael, in the meantime, I was wondering how the capital system, when you were applying the capital system lens into your research, what was the main actual finding that you perceived in terms of urban planning? I mean, that was more like outstanding for you. I mean,
Well, till now, I'm not finished. My is as an ongoing job. Yeah, I know. But what I could see that the relational capital in the city, this kind of city, that it was a huge industrial city, and this relational capital, and also the human collective capital, they are very impressive, and they are very important. Most because of the social issues that for me it was kind of a surprise when I arrived there, and I saw a city that was really not in a bad situation, because they are getting better, but social issues, it was very bad. So the relational and the immigrants and the racial issues, this is something that I believe is going to be something very important in the research about the relational and related with the evolution of the city.
right. Thank you. I mean, would you guys like to ask each other? I mean, and I mean also, yeah. Well, we have 5 minutes, but still.
Yeah, I had a question actually for Rafael. I was just curious. I know you didn't get to show us your charts and graphs, but I was curious because it looks like you looked at a lot of interesting data. What's something that stood out to you or that was just extremely interesting to you about your findings about Detroit?
Yeah, about the data?
Yeah, in the data or something you found. Yeah.
I have something here. Like I could get I got information from the U.S. Bureau of the National Bureau of Census Bureau. They changed the name in the meantime, but I have these indicators from the city. So some of the indicators are like some data, like the number of students that has graduated from 2012 to 2020. It's something that really impressed me, and the number of students and the number of the income, also the housing. So the housing is a problem in the qualitative analysis with the major and all the institutions that I've been researching, and also in the data because they have the price of the housing and the number of the empty houses that are the data that I have is something that is very impressive in this analysis. I don't know if I answer your question.
No, that's good. Thank you.
Okay.
Rafael, did you see that Nashali put in the chat?
Read for me, please, because I'm in the phone.
Yeah. In your discussion of your research findings, it was mentioned that during the pandemic, there was a betterment in city living, and during the 50s, Detroit, they had a prosperous time. How would these two periods compare to each other, if they are comparable in any way?
Well, in the pandemic, I don't know if we can compare both periods, but in the pandemic they were very. The city is a resilient city. So in the beginning of the pandemic, Detroit was a city that was really worried about the pandemic. So I don't know if I understand the question very well, but I don't think it's possible to compare pandemic situation with the falling from the 50s to 2012, the decrease of the people, the citizens in the city, because they are a city that is very empty now. They have a lot of houses, empty houses, and land spaces. They are trying to work, and also they were hit very hard by the pandemic because the poor people with not heating and with the food. Something that was really impressive to me was the amount of people that need food, and the students in the school that need a hot meal in the city of Detroit. So I don't know if I understood the question, but I don't know if it's okay.
Yeah, no, that's okay. I will copy that, and I'll send it afterwards for you to reflect and see if this is
okay.
or you wanna add an answer to her. Okay.
Okay.
Guys, I think we're just finishing, and I would like super thank you for all of you who came, and Jay, Hannes, and Rafael for sharing your studies. And this is really brilliant. I was wondering, like a quick one, if you guys wanna to pick a theme that our conference should focus on next year, what would it be? What would be something that you would like, maybe not, it's not in a program, people are not talking about, I would like to see some, if you don't have anything in mind, that's okay too.
I don't have anything that comes up spontaneously at the moment, but I think about the question and let you know if I get a good idea.
Okay, that's great.
Thanks a lot for having us. I just wanted to say, maybe one of the others has a better spontaneous idea than me.
I don't have anything brilliant. I like cities and think cities are cool, but I realize that's why I'm at this conference. So
Yeah, absolutely.
Maybe it's a special audience. But yeah, I agree with Hannes. It was really fun to talk to everyone and hear everyone's research. Thank you very much for hosting and for being here.
That's great. Thank you. And I encourage you to stick around for the next panel sessions, and I hope to see you all soon. Thank you.
Okay.
Bye.
Bye-bye.